So I do a lot of speaking, a lot of classes, workshops for parents, teachers, other counselors on the subject of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, more commonly known as ADHD. And this is generally really well received. I get lots of positive feedback, lines of people talking to me afterwards and asking questions, and it goes really well. And because of that, I've started working a lot with people in my private practice as a counselor on dealing with not only ADHD, but the fallout of living with ADHD. Because of that, I thought I want a bigger platform to sort of share the message about ADHD and what people need to know. Now, when I posted about this on my Facebook page, I got lots of positive feedback, lots of compliments. You're going to do great. Wish we could be there. Now, how do you think I reacted to that feedback? Do you think that I soaked it all in and I thought, I do know what I'm talking about. I'm a real success story, actually. Because if you do think that's how I responded, I'm surprised that you think that, because the answer is a solid no. I immediately began to feel self-doubt more than anything else. I started to think and rethink my introduction. How am I going to start? What am I even going to talk about? What should my slides be like? Will they laugh at my jokes? Oh, should it be funny? Should it be serious? Do they want the science? Do they want my experience? I told my wife I was probably stewing about where to start about 2 or 3 hours a day before I'd actually even started anything. Now, how does this happen? It happens because while I fell into ADHD as a specialty, as a counselor, but I was born into it as a reality, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that until after 3 decades of being the kid who was standing when everybody else was sitting, or the kid who was talking too much in class, or the kid who was staring out the window, daydreaming, of not handing things in, or handing them in late at best, of showing up for tests and not knowing that there was a test, or one time in my first semester of university, showing up at the wrong place, wrong time, wrong day for my final exam. I was a very understanding professor. I appreciate him. It was an accumulation of comments on my report cards like this one from my grade 6 report card. Ted is an alert, able student. He has the ability to achieve top marks. He needs to apply himself consistently. Or this one. I feel he is capable of higher marks, but his immaturity in class sometimes takes over his desire to do well. Or, in music, Ted participates well, but he could pay closer attention. But could I? Could I actually pay closer attention? When I was in grade 2 at Salmo Elementary School, I was paying very close attention one time to my teacher as she was chewing out a classmate after school. I don't know what it was about, but I was enthralled with this. And so while I was paying attention to that, I was taking off my indoor shoes, changing to my outdoor shoes. But because I was so focused on what they were doing, I kind of went into autopilot. And as I took off my shoes, I then proceeded to also take off my pants. I remember them hitting my ankles and looking up. Of course, this little girl, being the kind of girl who was getting chewed out by the teacher after class, she took great delight in running to the playground and announcing, "Teddy pulled his pants down in front of the teacher." Many of these experiences in my life left me asking the question rhetorically, how could I do something so stupid? Now, in terms of maturity, when I was in grade 7, I was in a cross-country race with a good friend of mine at school. A kid who was running in front of us slipped on some wet leaves and wiped out and was quite hurt. We were behind him. And so we helped him up. We sort of cleaned him off, walked him back to his coach, comforted him because we were so mature. And I then turned to my friend and said, obviously we're going to come in last because of this delay in the race. So I think probably the best thing is if we cross the finish line at the exact same time. That way we can both be last together. Neither one of us is the last person. He said, that's a great idea. And it was a great idea, but I did change my mind. With about 100 meters to go, I suddenly sprinted away from him, leaving him to finish last. And I felt sick. I couldn't even look at him. But worse, I couldn't even explain why I had done that. It happened so quickly. Now, in terms of potential, when I was in high school, I played on a pretty successful rugby team. I was a starter. I played a lot of the games. About 3/4 of the way through the season, I got called for an offside penalty. And I pulled my friend aside, who was also on the team, and I said, I got to admit, I don't even know what offside is. And his words to me were so comforting. He said, I don't know either. And as odd as it sounds, it felt almost better to be lost with somebody else than it would have to not be lost at all. Now, in terms of top marks, my average grade in math, for example, grade 8 through 11, when I was mercifully released from math forever, was a C-, a solid, well, actually very generous C-, which also happened to be my grades in social studies and chemistry and biology and history. You see the trend here? I couldn't even get an A in gym. So the idea that I was capable of achieving top marks, to me, was ridiculous. I don't know how anybody could think that I would be capable of something more than just scraping by. So when I finally and barely and miraculously graduated from Walnut Grove Secondary in 1994, I remember walking through the courtyard after convocation and almost literally crying tears of joy that I would never have to go to school again. I had made it. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea that school for me was completely miserable, because it wasn't. It was just mostly miserable. I did have friends. I played sports. I didn't get in too much trouble. But two things really stood out to me from my school experience. The first was that I was always a step slow. It seemed like I was always just a bit behind what was going on around me. That I was just catching bits and pieces of what I was supposed to be getting, while everyone else was getting the whole picture. What was going on in my mind was far more captivating than anything I was experiencing in the classroom. The second thing that stood out was that I would inevitably fail and disappoint people who had high hopes for me. Because people were always telling me, you have such potential. You can do such great things. The only thing in your way is you. But without a better, more accurate explanation of why I continued to fall short, it led to me developing this core identity, Ted Leavitt, master underachiever. And what's worse than being told that you have potential is when people start to compliment you and build you up, because you start to feel this weight of expectation that this is a thing you can do now. And the anxiety starts to build because you figure it's only a matter of time before you're exposed and they realize you're nothing special. You're not that good. I'm not saying that we shouldn't encourage people who have ADHD. Of course, we need encouragement. But we need to be mindful in our rush to positivity. Because if that person doesn't understand why they're underachieving, if it feels more like it's something that's happening to them rather than something they did, like it feels like it's beyond their control, telling them that they can do great things might be creating this anxiety within them. Now, if we live in the jungle and we don't stop to smell the pretty flowers every day, nothing bad's probably going to happen. But if we don't notice the poisonous snakes, really bad things will happen. Not only for us, but for our gene pool. Because of that, our brains are wired to detect and hold on to threats more than they are non-threats. And what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is that we are more likely to retain negative experiences than positive experiences. And when you've got ADHD and you have hundreds of pages of catalog of these kinds of negative events, it's no wonder that we grow to expect the worst possible outcome. We have that feeling, I think I'm forgetting something, because we probably are forgetting something. that feeling there's something I'm supposed to be doing. Because there probably is something you're supposed to be doing. We spend so much time waiting for the other shoe to drop because we've spent so much time looking for the other shoe. I mean, literally. How do you lose one shoe? You take off one shoe and then walk around with one shoe on and then eventually take the other one off, or maybe you take it off and carry it around with you and you think, oh, I'll put it on top of the fridge. I won't forget that I put it there. Or maybe you actually just left it with the other shoe, but you put your backpack on top of it. And then when you went to look for your shoe, you couldn't be bothered to move the backpack, so you swore it was gone and someone stole it. And then someone else comes and moves the backpack and says, it's right there, and then you feel really dumb. It's not just me. Maybe that happens too. I think this sense of impending doom is best summed up by the words of my wife after I'd experienced 3 positive outcomes in a row, and she looked at me with concern and said, that's too many good things. And she was right. A month later, I was in the hospital with kidney stones. So this sense of impending doom and disaster and falling short is known as learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the tendency to give up easily when things get hard, or to not even try in the first place because you assume that it will get hard and that you will fail or give up. Now, amongst the clients who come to see me in my private practice, those who meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD show levels of learned helplessness almost twice as high as the rest of my clients, as indicated by this helpful chart. When you realize the implications of that graph, how miraculous is it that they've even come to my office? But it also indicates one of the very cool paradoxes of the ADHD brain, and that is the simultaneous experience of hopelessness and optimism. Now, if you think about it, how would I have accumulated so many experiences of falling short or failure if I hadn't kept trying? We excel in giving up and getting up. The same brain function that makes it difficult for me to learn from my mistakes and continue to repeat them is the same thing that allows me to put those mistakes in the rearview mirror and look forward to the next challenge, swearing, this time's different. Now, after 3 decades of this, I bought a book called Scattered Minds by Dr. Gabor Mate, and I finally saw my life explained with 4 letters, ADHD. I went to a doctor, I started taking a medication, it immediately started to help my ability to focus, pay attention, regulate myself. I finally had an explanation for what was previously called laziness or stupidity, moodiness, bad attitude. I finally understood restlessness is not a crime. And eventually I would come to understand that my ADHD brain has just as many enhancements as it does annoyances. But after all this knowledge and learning and experience, those labels are pretty hard to shake. Now, how could this have been prevented? When I posted these comments on my Facebook page from my report card, one of my followers asked, so what should the teacher have said instead? I said, well, nothing really. I mean, they were factually accurate statements. I was disorganized, I was forgetful, I was immature, I was inconsistent, and I was capable. But what they didn't understand was the difference between capability and capacity. On paper, my brain had all of the abilities necessary to do what school was asking of me. But life isn't lived on paper. In reality, my brain did not have the natural capacity to take all of those capabilities and put them into practice. ADHD is well known as being a difficulty doing what you know. Now, what if a different explanation was offered? That my brain was just different, not less. That it was wired differently and that those differences were something to be celebrated, but also compensated for and enjoyed, but worked around and encouraged to be, but also supported by a system that could channel me in the right direction. What if, along with focusing on my tendency to give up, we focused on my tendency to keep getting up? When I was in elementary school, I was visiting a good friend of mine, and for fun, he would build detailed models of Star Wars spaceships. I too loved the idea of building models. I loved the idea. I mean, I literally couldn't wait to finish. The paint took too long, the glue took too long, there was too many parts and too many instructions, and most of my models ended up on fire in the backyard, smashed by a hammer. My friend didn't have that problem. He had quite the prolific collection. So one day I was at his house, and I was climbing down from the top bunk, and I put my hand on a shelf that held all of his Star Wars spaceships, naively believing that shelves on the wall are fastened to the wall. I can tell by your groans, you can see where this is going. As I leaned my weight on the shelf, it launched his spaceships like a catapult across the room, where they smashed to the floor in pieces. I felt sick instantly. It was probably one of the lowest moments of my life. It couldn't be taken back. It couldn't be fixed. Now, his dad heard the commotion and came rushing in. And how do you think he handled it? Do you think he said, "Hey, that's all right, Ted, everyone makes mistakes"? Did he say, "My bad, I should have fastened the shelf"? Or, "You know what, Ted, what is the value of objects compared to the value of relationship?" No, that's not what he did. He looked down at me and asked that question that I'd asked of myself so many times. "Ted, how could you do something so stupid?" I'd asked that question so many times of myself. Last summer, I had the opportunity to help out at a summer camp for kids around 10 to 12, boys and girls, full of energy, very differing levels of interest in what we were doing. There was one kid in particular who I recognized. I recognized myself. He was always a step slow. He was lost in his mind. He was curious about what we were doing. He was introspective, but that introspection was coming at the price of actually following instructions and doing what he was supposed to do. So he spent a lot of time actually getting scolded by the troop leader. "What are you doing over there? What did I say to do?" I finally felt bad enough for the kid that I pulled him aside. And I said, "You're not really a standing in line kind of guy, are you?" And he said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Yeah, I'm not either. I think probably has something to do with my ADHD brain." And he looked at me and said, "You have ADHD? I have ADHD." And I said, "Yeah, I can tell." And his face went red. But it wasn't the blush of embarrassment. I know that one really well. This was different. This was the blush that comes with feeling connected to somebody. Feeling that for the first time, a grown-up could relate to him. This was my investment in relatability paying off. Thank you.